digital natives and the phenomenology of a screen-first childhood. The first generation raised entirely inside digital environments is now entering universities. What does philosophy of mind, developmental philosophy, and their own lived experience tell us about how they experience reality differently? There is a generation now entering universities who have never known a world without a touchscreen, who learned to swipe before they could read, who had YouTube autoplay as a babysitter, Instagram as a mirror, and TikTok as the primary architecture of social reality by the time they were 12. We call them digital natives as though it's a compliment. But what does it actually mean to be a native to a digital world? What kind of mind does that world produce? The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty argued that perception is not passive. It is shaped by the body's habitual engagement with the world. We don't just see with our eyes, we see with our practice habits of looking. A sculptor sees texture differently from a musician. A chess grandmaster sees a board differently from a beginner. The world you habitually inhabit reshapes how you experience all worlds. This is called phenomenology, the study of first-person experience, and it gives us a disturbing framework for asking if a child's primary environment for the first decade of life is a screen, fast-cut, algorithmically optimized, infinite scrolling. What habits of perception does that produce? What does reality look and feel like to a mind shaped by that environment? According to Common Sense Media's 2023 report, children aged 8 to 12 in the U.S. spend an average of 5 hours and 33 minutes per day on screens for entertainment. Teenagers average 8 hours and 39 minutes. For context, most children sleep approximately 9 hours. The waking day is split roughly in half between screen and non-screen experience. The psychologist Jean Twenge has been tracking generational mental health data since the 1970s. In her research, she noticed something unprecedented happen around 2012, the year smartphone adoption crossed 50% in the U.S. Rates of teenager depression, anxiety, loneliness, and self-harm began rising sharply and consistently. The timing was not coincidental. Between 2012 and 2018, rates of major depressive episodes among U.S. adolescents rose by 52%. Rates of serious psychological distress among college students rose by 71%. Teenage girls showed the sharpest increases, correlating most strongly with social media use. Twenge's 2017 book, iGen, presented this data to wide academic debate. Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist who has become the loudest academic voice on this issue, argues in his 2024 book, The Anxious Generation, that social media has fundamentally disrupted three things that adolescent development requires: unstructured play, which builds resilience and social competence; sleep, which is consistently disrupted by nighttime phone use; and the gradual development of identity, which normally happens through private experience, failure, and unobserved experimentation, all of which have been replaced by permanent public performance. The developmental psychologist Erikson identified adolescence as the stage of identity versus role confusion. The central task of the teenager, he said, is to experiment to try on identities, fail privately, and construct a self through experience. Social media has made private failure structurally impossible. Everything is visible, everything is quantified, everything is archived, and the audience is always on. What does that do? What does that do to the formation of a self? A 2022 study published in JAMA Pediatrics found that adolescents who spend more than 3 hours daily on social media had double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, including depression, anxiety, and poor self-image, compared to those who spent less than 1 hour. The researchers identified social comparison as the primary mechanism. But here's where it gets philosophically interesting. These students, the ones now in your seminars, in your tutorials, in your labs, don't experience this as damage. They experience it as normal. The constant connectivity, the performance of self, the algorithmically curated reality. This isn't a departure from their baseline. It is their baseline. And that means the gap between their phenomenology and that of their professors is not a generational quirk. It's a genuine different way of being in the world. I want to split the room here. If you're under 25, can you remember a time before you had a smartphone? What do you actually remember about how boredom or loneliness felt before the phone arrived? And if you're over 30, can you describe a specific thing you experienced in childhood? An afternoon, a moment, a feeling of being lost in something that you don't think is accessible to kids today. Both answers in the comments, side by side, would be genuinely fascinating data. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about the importance of a private realm, a space of life that is not public, not performed, not observed. She argued that without this private realm, the public self becomes hollow. You need somewhere to be nobody, to fail, to think without consequence, in order to develop the interiority that makes genuine public life possible. Digital natives have been denied that realm almost entirely. Their childhood happened in public, whether they wanted it or not. The consequences of that aren't yet fully visible, yet generation is still young. But the universities are already seeing them. The rising need for mental health support, the difficulty with uncertainty and unstructured time, the challenge of sitting with discomfort without reaching for a phone. These are not character flaws. They are the predictable outcomes of a childhood spent in an environment that was never designed with child development in mind. The deeper question, and this is the one worth taking into a seminar, is whether the adults who handed children these devices, who built the platforms, who failed to regulate them, bear a moral responsibility for what has followed. The data is increasingly hard to argue with. The question now is what we choose to do with it. If you're a student watching this, I want you to say something directly. The difficulty you may feel with focus, with solitude, with uncertainty, that is not weakness. It is the entirely predictable product of the environment you were raised in. Recognizing it is the first move towards reclaiming it. That's all episodes in this series on human dependency and technology and AI and job displacement. If any of these hit something, share the one that unsettled you the most and tell me why in the comments. The conversation is what the podcast is actually for.